Hello everybody, welcome to our introductory session on the exciting or most exciting bit of the course on our film production coursework. I am aware that my introductory few episodes on framing, camera shots, camera angles, editing, lighting, sound, mise-en-scène were pretty lengthy. These are going to be much more quickfire, short, sharp and snappy episodes looking at some of the mandated short films to inspire your own work. If you've not already considered doing so, I'd really appreciate a subscription from you. And if they're helpful, please hit like, please subscribe, please hit the notification bell so that I can get this out to a wider audience. You'll have the option in your coursework to either produce a short film of 4 to 5 minutes or a screenplay and an accompanying digital storyboard. Digital storyboard meaning that there'll be digital photography attached to it. I'll go into greater detail about what that needs to include later. The screenplay needs to be 1600 to 1800 words long. A screenplay doesn't include things like camera angles or shots. That's something that is the domain of your digital storyboard. Beyond that, you need to be meeting a particular brief, which we'll come to in a couple of slides. And your aim throughout, whatever genre or plot or narrative you invent, needs to be coming back to meeting that production brief, which is something that you will then explore in your evaluation analysis. You'll be exploring how you used inspiration from the mandated films and how you've met the brief. You'll also need a cover sheet for the exam board to evidence your research and declare it's your own work. This academic year, 2022 to 23, is the first shift in those briefs. Your production must incorporate one of the briefs, and you'll be assessed on how well you execute that within your coursework. You can choose any genre you like, and it's possible that the genre might include a number of aspects from the options, but you must state which one is your chosen brief and think about how you will incorporate that throughout all of your work, because that's what you're being assessed on. Don't get muddled up and do one of the prior briefs. There's no reason that you as students should do so, because your teachers will have told you the pertinent ones. But just for the sake of clarity, so that you're aware, new ones were issued for those of you who are entering for A-level film studies in summer 2023, and they'll continue through 24, 25 and 26 if I'm right. So don't find earlier materials that say a narrative twist or a narrative beginning with an enigma or a narrative establishing and developing a single character or portraying a conflict between two central characters. They are the old ones that you are not permitted to do. The new and current briefs, at least between 2023's entry and 2026, are a narrative which has a distinct genre, a narrative which has parallel stories. I think that's a pretty tricky one in a 5-minute film, but I will show you some examples of things like that. A non-linear narrative or a narrator. Your choice, as I've said, is either a short film of 4 to 5 minutes or a 1600 to 1800 word screenplay. The screenplay has to be accompanied by a digitally photographed storyboard of a key section from the screenplay of approximately 2 minutes screen time, corresponding approximately to 2 pages of screenplay and approximately 20 storyboard shots. That can't be 20 consecutive frames because that would be nowhere near your 2-minute runtime. Your evaluation, also 16 to 1800 words, must make reference to all of the mandated short films that you've studied. Your teacher will have chosen a number of them. You have to do at least 3, totaling a minimum of 80 minutes. Now, across 3 of the short films, you could hit that 80-minute target. I don't do it that way because I choose the films that I think are the most engaging. And because of that, I end up doing 7 or 8, which is a crazy number when you've got to make reference to all of them, albeit briefly, but I think it's worth doing that. Your evaluative analysis will include an evaluation of narrative structure of the short film, an analysis of how the narrative features and dramatic qualities of all the short films studied are constructed through dialogue, highlighting key ideas which informed your own production. Cinematic influences. If you want to emulate a particular genre or a particular film, then you can mention that outside of the mandated films, that's fine. The one cardinal sin that you cannot be guilty of is talking about any influences from TV. They've got to be cinematic. And that then will incorporate an analysis of how visual and audio elements of other professionally produced films or screenplays, not just films as a text, but go on to various websites that I will recommend to you to look at examples of actual screenplays influencing your production. Ultimately, you're evaluating how you've met the brief and created meaning and effect. An analysis of how your production creates meanings and generates responses for your intended spectator in relation to other professionally produced films or screenplays, including at least one of the short films studied. So, you'll be creating a short film whether or not you do the film or screenplay. You've got to do a minimum of 80 minutes of the mandated list. Your teacher's probably chosen them for you. I've chosen 7, which is a bit bonkers, that I think are the most engaging, that doesn't quite meet the 80-minute requirement. And you do have to briefly talk about its influences. That might be as simple as an example of some editing or sound or colour palette, let alone emulating genre or narrative structure. It's to help you identify the typical codes and conventions of a short film, because they're quite different to a full-length feature. And actually they're probably the sort of thing that, because they're so short, allow you to get away with being wacky in a way that most films can't. So treat it as fun. You will also refer to those short films within your evaluative analysis. Incidentally, we will come in 8 or 9 episodes' time to look at the conventions of screenplays and storyboards. Tenets to live by. You must keep every part of your coursework, inclusive of any planning and all script drafts, etc., because that's evidence toward the work you've done. If your teacher does it like I do, they will probably want to see an introductory passage or a longer passage of your screenplay along the way. And although you get a choice of a practical film production or the screenplay and storyboard, I personally tend to state that I am going to sign off and give permission about doing the practical production only when I've seen evidence of the quality of some filming and camera work. Keep all planning and drafts because it's evidence of what you've done, and it's actually mandated by the board that your teacher needs to show that to authenticate your work. They need to keep it even after your final submission. If you're opting for the film, Get plenty of footage, more than you think you'll ever need, in order to have plenty of options in the edit. You need to be really organised. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So plan the logistics of the practicalities of getting mates together to film your production. What props you'll need, what settings, how long it's going to take. It will take 4 times longer than you reckon. And you need to make sure that you've got people who are willing to do this. You can't be in front of camera. You are behind the camera making the film. A lot of you might be doing drama as well, but it's not something that you can jump in and do yourself. You've got to be the one being the filmmaker. If you're doing the practical production, for heaven's sake, back it up everywhere. This will involve really big files. When I put my editing together, I'm often using 4K footage, and the number of gigabytes is enormous. It doesn't have to be 4K though. 1080p HD, nothing wrong with that. 720p, there's nothing wrong with that. They will, however, be slow to download and upload, and you probably are best working and editing in some sort of sophisticated software locally on that computer. By locally, I mean have it on the hard drive of the computer you're using, not the cloud, because the file sizes will just be too big otherwise. It won't cope. School will have licenses for things like Adobe Premiere Pro. You might have iMovie if you've got an iOS device, but back up to the computer, back up to the cloud, back up to an external drive, another computer at home, etc., etc. Because if you've lost it, you are in a mess that the exam board is not going to accommodate for. Incidentally, when you are filming, aim for the cinematic convention of 24 frames a second in your phone settings, because that will be useful to you later. You only need 60 frames a second, which would create a bigger file if you want to do a little bit of slow motion or something like that. 24 frames a second is what to go for. So we have this requirement of mandated short films to study up to 18 minutes worth. As I've said, you could do that across just 3 of them, but I feel that the shorts, 5 minutes, 10 minutes or less, are often more effective because they're closer to the style that you'll aim to emulate in your own short film or screenplay. So by doing 7 or 8, I am giving you more work to do in regard to your evaluations, but I think it's worth it playing the long game for your inspiration. It's only in a film this short that you can really get away with this level of wacky. You're required to refer to all films researched in the evaluative analysis. How did your research inform your production choices for meaning and effect? So over the coming short and sharp episodes, I'll be looking at analysis with you on About a Girl, 9 minutes, Connect, 5 minutes, Stutterer, 12 minutes, The Gunfighter, 9 minutes, Curfew, 19 minutes, Pitch Black Heist, 13 minutes, and High Maintenance, 9 minutes, which only totals 76 minutes of the mandated 80. I then usually get students to pick one further film. I've suggested Swimmer to them before, and actually all of my class previously chose that, against also options like La Jetée or Wallace and Gromit and the Wrong Trousers, but I heartily advise you not to go down the animation route. It's way too much work. And maybe something like Night Fishing, which is something of a wacky experimental film. Of course, your teacher will have decided the combination that you're doing already. I've just picked 7 that I found the most engaging. Beyond that, if you're struggling for ideas, I'm going to point you into some ways of coming up with ideas like what if scenarios, or even looking up wacky and weird news stories from Sky News and what have you. I'm also going to suggest that you watch, rather than analytically study like the prior films on the last slide, quite a number of other short films, just to give you a wealth of inspiration. I also want you to have a look, if you can, at some vignettes from a film called Paris Je t'aime. But it's only those on the prior slide that are the mandated ones that you must reference in your evaluation. But by all means, show that you've done further research and planning too. The more you do, the more inspiration you get, and the better the outcomes, as I've proven in the past with prior classes. So short films have a distinctive narrative structure which frequently starts in media res, in the middle of the story, or with some kind of enigma. Whilst there's likely to be some clear development in character and storyline, short films frequently conclude with an open, unresolved ending. And they also frequently employ narrative twists. So think about this way, that you might have a non-linear narrative or parallel narratives within something as short as 5 minutes. It might allow you to have a circular structure where you begin at the end, and then that might give you some parallel narrative options. Tricky thing to do in 5 minutes, but a good challenge and something that's fun and wacky in that short space of time. Researching short films allows you to understand the types of film form used and its distinctive narrative structure. It also helps you understand the dramatic qualities of short films and how they're constructed, including through dialogue, in a way that might be different from the mainstream. It might open you to some things you've not considered before, and that could be really fun and creative. It should be. This also will help you prepare for evaluating your piece, because you need to be looking at how it's informed your meaning and response and your production choices. I should warn you that quite a number of these short films deal with quite sensitive issues and controversial topics, which actually in a short film is another convention of these 5-minute things that normally wouldn't necessarily be quite so abrupt in a mainstream film. So we'll be starting in the next episode with About a Girl. Prior to that, in the meantime, a research task for you. What are the codes and conventions of a short film? Note down what you think the typical codes and conventions are, and add that to your own ideas with research. Consider things like setting, themes, characters, props, narrative structure and style, cinematography, editing, mise-en-scène and sound. I will hope to see you next time for our first short film analysis, but that's it for today. Please hit like, please subscribe if you've not done so already, and if you hit the notification bell, then you'll be alerted to those future episodes as they arise.